let's just go. So this is the official start right here. Everything else from this point on is YouTube. So
Okay.
I'm Ben Bates, and you are.
Chris Staggs.
And you are a professional storyboard artist with some professional comic book penciling, maybe inking.
I did some digital inking.
Oh, okay.
But it
Still,
was,
you got to ink your own pencils.
yeah, but it was bad.
Nonetheless, you're a
It was
professional
really
storyboard
bad.
artist in animation, and you've got some professional comic book artwork under your belt too. So
Definitely drawn a few.
what's that?
Definitely penciled a few.
Oh, okay.
The inking is, questionable.
The thing that I heard is that you should, with like social media and stuff, is you want to say who you are and what you're doing. And so obviously we just went through who we are, but in like this YouTube stuff, like what I'm doing, I want to interview people specifically on a creator-owned focus. So like even though it's cool that you're doing the professional work and stuff, and we can chat, that will come up naturally or whatever. That's not really the goal. The goal is the fact that you want to write and draw your own comic books. You want to do creator-owned stuff. So that's the primary thing that I want to explore. So starting off though, like what. Like go through. Let's go through your history. Like, when do you start out? When do you discover comics? How does that? Because you want to write and draw your own comic books. So when does the comic thing start for you?
Like, when did I initially want to draw comics?
Or even when did you discover comics? Like, when did they come into your life?
Oh, man, I'm trying to think of like maybe like when I was 10, maybe a little younger. So in 1985, I was 10, and like I've kind of been realizing, like, oh man, a lot of the things that sort of like got me interested in this kind of like work or just drawing or whatever, like happened around that time, Yeah. So, and I think that's kind of like when I started to be into comics.
Okay. Do you remember like what it was? Like, do you remember what maybe your first couple comics were? Were they Marvel, DC? Was it something?
Man, so the first one I remember getting was like a Fall of the Mutants X-Men comic. I actually like bought it recently just to have it again.
What is it?
But it's got like it's a X-Men, Uncanny X-Men, and like Storm is in the front. She's like flying towards you, and like all the other X-Men are sort of like flying off to the sides.
If this is 85,
it was part of
the cool X-Men. There's like, this is good X-Men, right? At that time.
It is definitely later than 85. Oh. Yeah, it had to be, right? Like with X-Men, it was when I started off. It was Silvestri was drawing, and I was like really into that. And I remember like being aware of it, like the drawings being good. It wasn't just like, oh man, I love this comic or whatever. It was like, oh man, So I must have been drawing by then, of course, because I would like marvel at some of this stuff.
Yeah.
But and like Spider-Man.
So jumping back real quick, I want to explore a little bit more of this concept that you're alluding to, this 1985, or this idea that you're bringing up. What do you mean that like 1985? Like, is this where you're saying that a lot of great things are? I mean, I agree that there's a lot of good things out there, but I'm wondering if maybe. Well, go ahead. Just tell me what's your concept here. What's special about 1985?
So, like, I probably won't remember everything, but like I don't know. I just became like aware. Like, I guess I started thinking about like, man, what types of things do I want to make? And then so that got me thinking about like the things that got me excited when I was younger, watching or reading or whatever. And I noticed like a lot of the things were from around that time period. So it was like Goonies, like Gremlins, Ghostbusters. I don't know if those are all like 85 exactly, but around that time. And then the comics, I guess, would have been a little bit maybe after that, like the Transformers cartoons,
Yeah.
So just a lot of things around
inspiration. This is a lot of like when you look into your like what I want to create, you look inside yourself and you find that that's where a lot of the inspiration is originating from. Is that what you're saying? Like that
I
time
think
period of
so.
your life?
Yeah, and just like like the there's humor in these things, but there was also like like Gremlins has what would be kind of like scary things. Although as a kid, I don't remember it like scaring me at all. Like it was
It
just
definitely
fun to
scared me
me.
when I was a kid. Yeah.
Oh yeah, well you were younger than I was, so. But yeah, like there's sort of macabre elements to it,
Oh yeah.
and then Gremlins has some of the fun gore,
Right.
So when I think about stuff like that, it's like, or when I think back to like the things that I liked, it's like, oh, they were all kind of this type of entertainment,
Okay, and
So
it sounds like it's like a touch point for you when you're creating your own stuff to say, here's the things that I know I liked, and here are the elements that I can identify that were all working for those things. And so if I can include those, is this kind of the concept here?
yeah,
Okay.
yeah, because
Yeah,
I
that's
think
cool.
like I've kind of like gone through that a little bit with the way that I draw and stuff. Like I always wanted to draw when I was younger. I always wanted to draw like very cartoony, But
Mm-hmm.
then at some point, like I was like, man, I want to get better at just drawing, and so then I focused more on that stuff. And post that, it was like kind of difficult to actually be like cartoony, I'm like, man, it felt wrong in a way, Um,
Mm.
so then thinking about like, man, who are the artists that like, because I think one of the things that actually messes me up is like I'm like, oh, I like this guy, he draws very realistically or whatever, and it's awesome, and I really like that. But then I also like these other artists that are like really cartoony,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'm like always, you know,
Right.
like going
Getting
back and forth between these ideas. But then, yeah, like at some point, I was just like, man, what are the things that like really that one that I liked initially that got me interested in this kind of stuff, and then what are the things that get me like excited now, as opposed to just being like, oh man, that's really well done. I appreciate it in that way. But
mm-hmm.
like, man, what are the things that like, I'm like, oh, dude, that makes me feel like when I was younger.
Yes,
Um,
absolutely. Yeah.
so then I started to like, yeah, just identify that kind of stuff, and it helped. I feel like get me back to where I want to go.
Yeah. Okay. So
Um,
jumping back into 1985, you're 10. 1987, you're going to be 12. So around that time period, you're drawing, and you're recognizing that Silvestri has a certain level of skill. Like you're not just you're actually noticing the quality of artwork. So when does meaning that you're obviously working at drawing well enough to be able to tell that kind of stuff. When does the idea that you want to draw comics or you want to work in comics actually enter into your life?
Man, I'm not sure actually. I started to work at a comic shop when I was 17,
Mm.
and like I worked with Drew Moss, who he's drawing
Yes.
comics now, um, and I know like we both were trying to find out, just how it was done, right? Because it was like you had like the Marvel tryout book, which was like a big book that you could draw pages in and submit, I guess. But that was like the only thing. And whenever that came out, I had already been thinking like, oh, this is what I want to do. I want to draw comics, because that book was even sort of like oh wow, they draw on like this kind of paper, or I might have known by then, but I can remember a time before that not knowing,
Yeah.
or looking for that information, like what do they draw on, how large do they draw, that kind of thing. Um, so
I didn't know this book existed. I had heard. I mean, I didn't know. What is the other book? It's like another book that a
there's a
lot
couple one of them.
of.
There's one with like a Art T. Bear, I think, cover. The X-Men are on the cover, and I think there's an older one.
Yeah, I'm seeing one with Spider-Man on it. It looks like it's coming from 1983.
Yeah,
So
so that's not the one that I knew about.
and there was How to Draw the Comics the Marvel Way, which is another book I had never heard of until after I became a professional artist. I think
Oh
missing
yeah,
out on these was a real loss for the younger me.
yeah. Yeah, man. I think like that book is exactly what it says it is. How to
Mm-hmm.
Draw the Marvel Way. Like there's stuff in there I know that like people sometimes mention like I wouldn't do it like that.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just I mean taste change or styles change, that kind of a thing. So I get it, but like man, that's it's a good book still. I
Oh yeah,
think
I mean
has a
from
lot of cool stuff in it.
like from what I understand, because I've never actually seen that book, but from what I understand, it gave a lot of the fundamentals, which is what I was needing, like just the knowledge of like, do
Right.
you want to draw a background? Here's how you draw a perspective, grid and
Yeah.
vanishing points in order to to populate that city that Spider-Man's swinging through and stuff like that would have been so. So anyway, taste one thing, just the fundamentals of drawing would have been so great for me to have got,
For
especially
sure. Yeah.
tied in with something that I respected. Like it was one thing if an art teacher was trying to teach me something from a very specific point of view, but if it was something like, oh, this is how the things I love are actually made too, or that
Yeah.
would have anyway. Now we're getting distracted on my stuff. So all right, so you
On art instruction,
yeah
it's
yeah.
difficult. I think
So you're
it's like you have these.
go ahead.
I was just saying, like you have these ideas, like as if you're trying to teach somebody, you have these ideas that like make sense to you because you've sort of been through all the steps or whatever to get to that realization, But then if you go backwards and that person hasn't, like they're just not ready to understand some concepts.
Yes, yes.
So it's like, oh man, this teacher wasn't good or whatever. Or maybe it's years later, you're like, oh, now I get that, even though at the time I had no idea.
All right, so jumping back real quick.
Yeah, and then hopefully it triggers that.
Yes, hopefully. So you're in the comic shop. You're working in the comic books. You are being surprised by learning about like literally the page size of what comics are actually drawn at, and at some point though you're going to make a jump. So where we go out from here?
From the comic shop?
Yeah.
Man, I think like back then, like I wasn't really thinking too much about drawing my own things. I was mostly thinking about like, oh, I want to draw, like probably from Marvel,
Yeah.
I know it's not the question you asked, but like that, I was just thinking about like the first things that I drew, like in terms of comic stuff. It was always sort of like trying to get like a job in comics.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm.
So yeah, I mean, I worked there for a while, and then I don't know. I feel like maybe like I didn't draw a whole lot for a while after I left that job. I guess I was still drawing some because then from that point, like I went to the Kubert School for comics, the Joe Kubert School. And I was there for 3 years.
Now what?
And then,
how did you know about the Joe Kubert School? Is that something like? How did you even know it existed?
man, so like when I graduated high school, my grandparents lived in Roselle, New Jersey, which is like somewhat close to where the school is. And I think I probably saw an ad in a comic, and I recognized it was in New Jersey, and then I found out it was close to where my grandparents lived. So one year, I went with my parents to try to look at the school, but we didn't make an appointment or anything. We just showed up, and they're very much like, oh, you have to have an appointment, whatever. So they wouldn't let me look at it. They just gave me the packet or whatever for the information about the school. And man, I mean, I was dumb. Like I didn't realize you could get like financial aid and stuff, and it just seemed like too expensive, so I didn't go. And I basically just like wasted time at community college.
How old were you when you and your parents tried to go visit that first time?
It was when I graduated high school.
Okay.
So I was like 17 when I graduated. So it was either like 17 or 18. And yeah, I pretty much just did, I didn't think like I could, there was like, back then I remember like, okay, I want to learn how to draw and be able to apply that to comics. But every art school that I would like hear about, it was always like graphic art.
Mm-hmm.
it was I didn't even know like really about like illustration and stuff, and definitely didn't know like what schools taught that other than the Kubert school. That's why it was so exciting. But yeah, I just didn't think I could afford to go there. So yeah, I just kind of was like depressed for like 8 years, and then finally figured out like, oh, you can get financial aid and stuff. And I'm pretty sure like, well, I know that my parents helped me, so I was able to go, and I stayed with my grandmother. So the housing was like, I didn't pay for housing the first year. And then the second year I stayed unofficially in school housing.
Okay.
Like I had a mattress, so like I roll up and keep under like somebody's drawing table. So I stayed there sort of on the down low.
Mm.
But yeah.
And what was your experience like at the Joe Kubert? So well, okay. So let's jump back right. So you graduate. Comic books are in your mind. You're thinking, I do want to do this, which is why you go over, to try and get a tour of the school, try to see what it's like. And you don't think it's financially possible, but so is it, when you go through this period of 8 years, but the moment you figure it out, like it's comic books are still like, did you give up on the idea of, were you still like, you're going to school, you're learning drawing in just, let's say, the graphic arts programs or whatever, but comic books, you're never losing sight of comic books during that time? Like you're still thinking, I'm going to do comic books?
Yeah, I think I always wanted to do comics. Yeah, there was times where there was like large chunks of time where I would like stop drawing. I was just like depressed.
Yeah.
And maybe it was like maybe partly was like, man, I really wanted to go to school, and then didn't happen. And then I don't know. I just felt like, man, what am I going to do?
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, I don't think I ever really like gave up on the comic thing.
Okay, that's awesome. So then you get there, and you said you were there for 3 years in total. Is that like the normal period?
That's the whole.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
yeah.
Did you feel like? Did it give you what you needed? Did it? Was the experience good? Would you say like this is what you wanted out of it?
I mean, it's you'll probably get the same answer from a lot of people, but I mean, one, like I met a lot of people that I still work with, and then have given me work. Have basically like my career is because of these people that I met at the school, that have all ended up working in animation, and initially like went to get into comics. It seems like a lot of us sort of like they dabbled in comics briefly, and then there was just like this opportunity to get into animation. And I mean, man, comics are tough. So
yes,
you get into animation, and then it's like, man, I want to do comics. So I mean, basically, like everybody that I know out here still wants to do comics. At least in some way.
Okay, so these are the people that you meet at the Kubert School. But in particular, we're talking about like, so before you go in, did you know? Were you making your own comics? Were you drawing? Like, were you drawing pages?
I was doing like sample stuff. Yeah, I didn't. And this is something like, if I could encourage people that like comics and want to draw comics and stuff. And we've talked about this a lot, like draw your own comics, like write your own comics, draw your own comics, because I did like sample pages for, using characters from like DC. I did a few like DC samples. I don't know why, because I was always like a Marvel guy, but I did one that was like the Alan Scott Green Lantern, if he like the original Green Lantern guy.
Oh, no, I have no idea.
I think those were like some of the first pages that I drew, like samples, and I did like a Robin. I did a Robin story, which I sort of like the scenario I came up with myself, So,
so you're not working.
That was,
so was the first one, the Green Lantern, was that from a script, like a sample script, or how are you doing the samples? What?
Man, that's a good question. I think it must have been from a sample script.
Okay.
I think, because I don't remember like coming up with any ideas for that. So I think that was like a sample script.
But then with Robin,
I didn't do like.
Go ahead.
What's?
Oh yeah, I cut you.
I was just to say like I didn't do like a ton of sample pages. I should have done more probably.
Okay,
but,
so how does this tie in? So with the Robin thing, you did your own scenario. You're writing basically your own, not necessarily a script, but you're giving yourself something to draw with the samples. And so a moment ago, you said you would encourage people to write and draw their own comics. How's this tying into the potential for the samples? Like even just encourage people to write and draw their own samples, or are you saying don't even bother to do?
Oh, I just think like if you know you want to draw comics in the future, even if you do want to work for like a company or something as your like ultimate goal, I would just say like, yeah, write and draw your own comics, because I think the sooner you can like combine those two disciplines, the writing with the drawing, the better. It's going to give you like a much greater chance of actually doing some good stuff in your life, like in terms of creating your own things. And the later you start, you can do it, but like it's difficult, to try to learn a completely new way of storytelling,
Right.
or like, plus I think like if you're doing your own stories and you're writing and drawing them, like, I don't know, you're just self-sufficient. You don't have to, like, one thing I would always be like, man, I need to work with a writer, to actually like have something worth drawing. But then I always like wasn't sure like who's good,
Yeah.
I didn't like I feel like in trying to like learn how to write better, I've begun to realize like, oh, okay, these are the stories that are better than other things that like I used to like maybe,
Yeah.
So it just helps, hone your eye for that kind of thing, and hopefully like makes you better at creating
Yeah,
your own
there's
stuff.
something I've been thinking about recently, where because you and I we're coming more from an American comic book background, where the traditional method, especially when we were growing up, you're going to have what I call the Frankenstein approach to making comics, where you have a writer who's one guy, a penciler who's one guy, an inker who's one guy, and and then the more modern generation, over the last 20 years, is more manga influenced, where the writer and artist is the same person, right? And so they're growing up thinking like, okay, this one person, or this one woman, the one guy, girl is doing this. Is the story I love, and so they automatically grow up thinking, I got to do that, or I want to do that, and if they can do it, I can do it. So I think that like part of my problem when I was younger was that I was drawing from as far back as I can remember, which seemed to be my natural skill set. And so when I looked at the list of credits that are available to me, it's like, well, I draw, so I must be the artist, and now there's this other guy who's a writer, and I don't know what inking means, but so I think that that's something, thankfully, that is less common nowadays. Do you feel like that was part of your, like, because you were naturally drawing, that was your first, let's say, major skill. Did you ever, when has writing your own stuff really like you did your own sample with Robin scenario, but when does the idea that I want to write my own stuff actually enter into your consciousness? When is that part of the?
Yeah. Well, I think I had the kind of like a similar idea about things just based on like, sorry, like, okay, I draw. So what jobs are there in comics that involve drawing? Oh, it's the penciler, it's the inker. I didn't want to ink, I just wanted to draw. But then I just kind of like stopped there,
Right.
Like, oh, okay, I work for this company and they'll have a writer or whatever. But, like I've always, like as a kid, I would come up with like little stories and stuff. I wouldn't draw them, I think that's like where I messed up,
Yeah.
Like I should have been drawing that stuff. And it's probably because it was like, I don't know. I don't remember like thinking this, but like, I'm wondering if it was kind of like, that's hard to do, like it's still like hard to draw pages, right? It's easy to sit down and just like drawing your sketchbook or whatever, but to like actually sit down and draw narrative pages is, it's harder than
Oh yeah,
like
like a
most of
cool
the other
pinup
things that
drawing
you're going to do.
of Wolverine or something like that.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So, but I would always like come up with stories like as a kid and stuff. I mean, I was, my sister, I have two older sisters, and when they went away to school, I was by myself a lot, right? So I'm like just in my head, like coming up with ideas and things, and so I've kind of always done that. I mean, I think like when I worked at the comic shop, like Drew and I maybe kind of talked about possibly like doing our own things at some point, but I don't remember any sort of like specific ideas, that I wanted to do. I think it was probably not until I came out here, and started work with you, and we would always talk about that stuff, and I think that's when I really started to like think about it more seriously, and then like now to like see that you've finished your book and stuff, it's like, man, you can do it, like I think that there's always been, something in my mind that's like, man, can you do that?
All right, well, so that's interesting. So let's jump back real quick to the Kubert School. So you're in the Kubert School. You have graduated. Do you feel like when you graduate, you have the skill to draw comic books?
No.
Is it okay? All right. Well, do you have the goal at that point to apply to try and draw? Is that where your focus is? You're thinking, I'm going to go. I'm graduated now, and I'm going to go work for Marvel and DC or Image or anything like that.
Yeah, I went to school again because I didn't feel like I knew how to draw.
Okay. All right.
So like going way back to the question that you asked about school, how the experience was and stuff. Like like I said, I met a lot of like awesome people that I still work with. So in that way it is fantastic, and like the other thing that's really good for is you have, you have 10 classes a week, 2 per day. And most of them are drawing classes. So you're getting assigned like drawing assignments for 10 classes that are due every week, or, maybe someone will have slightly longer deadlines, but you drew a lot. I mean, that first year it was like, I drew so much, just crazy long hours, and everybody would do it, That's how I ended up like staying sort of at the school housing the second year, because it's like I would just go over there and work with everybody, and half the school is like working overnight, so it was really good for like, hey, this is kind of the pressure that you'll be under professionally, and also like you're just gonna have to like have the stamina to draw for a really long time, so it was good there. And some classes were more useful than others, and some of the instructors were better than others, I think. So, I learned some things there, but I feel like you get better at drawing the way that you already draw going there. And it might be a little different now, but that's how I felt at the time. And so when I got done, I didn't feel like I was where I wanted to be in terms of just like technical drawing ability.
Yeah.
And I wanted to like learn how to paint a little too. So yeah, I went to school again. So, and then after that, that's when I started to do a couple comics.
This is about like a real back to, so you were doing what, normal school, normal college, Kubert school, back to normal college.
Yeah, well, I mean, it was an art school after the Kubert school.
Okay.
So it was really just art stuff.
Okay. So now you do that, and you come out of that, and now, do you feel like you have the skill set plus the intention? I'm going to do comic books. Like you just said, you got some work, but that was your mind. You're like, all right, now I do have it, and I'm going to put it into use.
I guess they like brought editors to the school, so they brought Axel Alonso is who came out and who gave me my first work, and it was a Dark Horse editor that came out too. I can't remember who that was, but they brought out a few editors, that looked at our stuff, and Axel like just happened to be the one that I spoke to, and they were doing like a new Deadpool book that they were sort of like trying lots of different artists on. So I was able to get I think it was like a 10-page story in one of those.
So I might be misunderstanding something. They brought editors to the art school. You've returned to the Kubert.
Yeah,
school. They brought editors to the art school.
No. So, yeah.
Was there a comic book related program or something that you were into?
Well, I mean, they had visual development. I was in the illustration program. They had an animation program. I mean, it was all arts, fine art, sculpting.
It's really surprising still, though, that they would bring comic editors out. I mean, maybe they do that all the time, but either way, that's still really cool. So that's awesome. Because this is, of course, exactly, if you're going to go work in comic books, these are the people you need to be talking to.
Well,
go ahead.
And just like really quickly, like at the Kubert School, you go to, we went to, I think we went to Marvel, and they had a bunch of editors kind of like come around and look at our samples and stuff, but I mean, they just weren't good enough at the time. I remember like while I was at the school, I won a scholarship like based on some pages, right? And then the year after, I went to Comic-Con, and I think I used maybe the same pages. I submitted them to DC to get a portfolio review, and like they didn't even choose me to look at my portfolio. Like they weren't very good,
Good enough to potentially show promise, though. For like a school, right? Like, okay, this is a person that could
I guess
rise to something, but from a professional standpoint, this is not a person who's ready for work, maybe, or something like that.
And like the thing was, I kind of knew that, I was like, I'll try to like get a portfolio review at DC, but I know I'm not good enough to get one, and I didn't. Okay,
So I want to understand this, because ultimately we're going to create our own place. But what I want to know is where your mindset is. So, where your intentions are, where your focus is. So you've graduated from this, you Kubert School to the next art school. You've met with a Marvel editor who's given you some work. And are you thinking, all right, this is it. This is the start of my comic. This is what I do. I draw comic books for a living. This is what this is my focus. This is what I've been pointed towards the whole time. Okay. And then, I know a little bit about the future. Obviously, we meet in animation. So where does the change, what happens from drawing this Deadpool story to now I'm going to go work in animation?
Let me think. I mean, I did basically 2.5 issues for the Deadpool thing. And I thought they were okay. Actually, if I think back now, I'm like, okay, yeah, they probably weren't good enough. But I did that, and then I think it was just sort of like, okay, this is what we had at the time for trying out some new people, and you didn't maybe blow us away, right? So there wasn't any more work there, and I'm trying to remember because after that at some point, but I don't remember how long it was. I did a couple other books. I did a what was it called? Mass Effect comic, and then another smaller one. Those are the ones that I sort of digitally inked and stuff.
Okay, and what publisher was that for?
I think it was Dark Horse.
Okay.
I don't know, I have copies around somewhere that they comped to me. I'm like, man, I don't want these. Why do they gave me way too many? I don't want any of them. But and then I did those 2 projects, and then I just didn't have work. So I was probably trying to get comic work still. But then at that point, there were people that I knew that had already started working out here in animation, and then it was kind of like, hey man, like, do you want to try to do this? And I didn't really have many options, right? So I was like, yeah, like they were saying good things.
Yeah.
And again, like they had all worked somewhat in comics, right? So it was like they understood like the difference between working in comics, at least early on, and then working in animation right from the get go. Like you're already making a living wage and just better,
Yes.
as far as that stuff goes.
Mm-hmm.
So yeah, I was like, just at some point, I started thinking like, okay, like I'm going to try to get into animation because the comic thing just didn't seem like it was possible.
Yeah.
Long term,
Oh yeah.
like
Yeah.
I needed more than I was getting from it at that time, so
I think even, I was lucky enough to work, consistently in comics for a couple years, but I still don't think it's a long term. Like that when I first, like my very first year drawing comics, I was, a member of Periscope Studio, and at the time, there was a variety of hero initiatives were going on to take care of like these legendary comic book artists or something who had never made much money and now are dying, and that really helped me see like, oh yeah, this is fun. This is not this is not a place you spend, or rather it's not anything you can rely on to take care of you in the long term. And that was a big huge motivation for like, all right, well, I got to go and I was working consistently, but I was extremely poor because comic books just don't pay that much money, and that's why a huge reason why I went to the animation industry was just to make a better living wage doing something else. So you, how long have you been in the animation industry? When did you move out there? How long has it been now?
I think it was. Let's see. I think it's been about like 12 years,
Okay.
12 or 13 years maybe. So maybe like what, 2011? No, I feel like it was before that. I think 2010 or something like that.
Yeah.
That's when I came out here. So yeah, like maybe 13 years.
And so now we know why you went from comic books to animation. But ultimately, this is the whole point. You're going to do your creator-owned stuff. Something in animation's not working out. So now you're being paid millions of dollars to draw for a living.
Oh, yeah.
And yet that's still not enough.
Right. Yeah, I need more than millions.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, I think, man, it's just like, you're always working on other people's things, their ideas, you have to, like one thing about animation and any kind of like sort of mainstream creative thing is you have a lot of changes that you'll have to make. It's just part of the work. You're collaborating with a lot of people, and again, it's like not your idea, right? And as artists, I mean, you always think like, oh man, I would have done it this way,
Right.
I think it was better this way, or whatever, So, just just wanting to have like the freedom to say, man, what can I do on my own? Like, can I make something good? I don't know. I think like maybe, I want to try, and I also just like want to try to make something that is just totally me,
Yes.
and that kind of thing. So I think for a lot of people, you always have that draw. You're always sort of like pulled to want to make especially like as I get older, I'm like, man, I want to have some of my own work out there that is just me, So
Well,
yeah.
so what I bet you, which would have been 2015, you had already, had a couple ideas of the stories that you would want to do. So that means that, somewhere between, when you're just focusing on art to 2015, you've started to generate and cultivate. Because, if I think the very earliest ideas I ever heard about were Ibex, the Bettys. I don't know if there's a full name to that. and then Skellingers, I think, was one of the very first things you ever talked about too. So you'd already had those three ideas. Where do these? So somewhere there's the
Yeah.
growing part where you're like, this is an idea, this is an idea, these are ideas that you're collecting and beginning to create. Do you know when those had started to
I mean, it had to be after I moved out here.
Okay.
Because like in school, I don't remember. Maybe Ibex, but in school, I don't remember like doing anything with my own ideas. Like
Mm-hmm.
I remember there was some projects that we had, and I had to like come up with something, and it wasn't any of those things.
Mm.
Um, so I probably started thinking about those after I moved out here. Like I said, I mean, I'm thinking about, I mean, listen, man, like we all like, you're like reading a book or you're watching a movie, and then it's like 30 minutes later, and you're like, you had gone off in your mind thinking about like, oh man, this would be cool, or whatever. So and you just like create these scenarios, right? So yeah, I think it was just like, yeah, coming out here and working in animation, and sort of like you see the pipeline and stuff, and you start to understand maybe the way that stories work a little bit more. Um, and so I think probably partly what came from that was like, okay, like let me. I've always had ideas and stuff. Let me see if I can go a little bit further with that. Start to write more and have it become like an actual story, as
Yeah.
opposed to just an idea.
Okay, and so this is making me think too. What's interesting is that like yeah, this is still early on in me interviewing people who are going into the creator owned routes, but you're at an interesting stage where you do have this comic book. You've drawn professional comics. You've drawn storyboards for a long time, so you know what it means to work and grind at a project. But in terms of your own story, as you had mentioned earlier, that sort of instinct when you were younger of knowing that like that's going to be hard. You are still at a stage where you have not drawn a page of your
This
creator
interview is
project.
over, man.
So this is an interesting part of the journey. So
Yeah.
like I said, I know you had those ideas, and over the last couple of years, they've clearly been growing to a point where it's driving you forward. You have focused in on one project in particular to start yourself off. So let's hear about that and why did you choose that? Why is that the direction that you want to begin your creator own journey, or rather this stage of it anyway?
Yeah. Well, I'll just say like this year is the year for the drawing.
Okay, yeah.
I think like again, like I guess you said we met in what 2015. Man, that's a long time ago.
Yes, now that you pointed out.
Yeah, I don't know like when, because I feel like at some point, when you and me and Kyle Shockley did the started to do the mastermind stuff. Like, I think it was sort of at that point that things just became like a little more like serious in terms of like making something of my own. And yeah, I mean, I think just talking about that stuff regularly and us all kind of like pursuing, wanting to learn more about stories and how they're made and all that kind of thing. Yeah, it's just like these steps, man, that you take to. So anyway, like I haven't drawn a whole lot yet.
But, your creation.
Yeah, right. Yeah, but I have written a good amount, and yeah, I think with this is just like it's something that I had been thinking about for a while and had been trying to it wasn't completely like working, and yeah, within like I don't know the last 6 months or something, I sort of realized the whole thing, with the ending and just how the story is going to hopefully work. So yeah, there's other things that maybe I should start with, like shorter stories. Is probably what I would choose to do. But yeah, I don't know. I just have been thinking about this.
So this is Skellingers. Skellingers is what
Yeah.
you've chosen to do. And so when you say shorter stories, how long is Skellingers? How long do you think it's intended to be right now?
Okay, so I want it to be as short as it can be, but as long as it needs to be.
Yeah.
You know, I don't want it to. I want to get it done.
Right.
You know, so I don't want it to like blow up and become longer than it needs to be. So I'm really focused on like, okay, these are the absolutely essential moments throughout the story, and I don't want to have anything that doesn't need to be there, you know. So with that said, like I'm thinking 48 pages is hopefully. It maybe it could be less than that. I'm not really sure because again, like I haven't drawn a ton of comics, you know, and the more that you do these things, the more you sort of figure out your storytelling style, and like I have ideas about how I want to approach stuff, but I don't know how that's going to translate into like the amount of pages to tell a certain thing, you know.
Yeah.
So
really, let's dig in for a second here when you talk about how 48 pages, and you're talking about that maybe it would have been better to have started with a shorter project. So what would you have? You know, let's just say you were going to. What would be a shorter, and why would you choose to do shorter? What would be the advantage to that?
Well, there's a lot of different reasons, but I mean, I guess the biggest one is just like just to get more reps in, you know, get in, get more pages drawn, and you know, hammer out the process kinks, and you know, just get moving, you know, just get some motivation or you know, some momentum, that kind of thing. So yeah.
Well, let's say for you, what would be an ideal shorter? Like if 48's not short enough, what would be an ideal short amount of pages?
Oh, I mean anything like 1 to 10 pages.
Okay.
You know, so you know, like I've thought about like a daily thing, and I see people that do it. You know, like you see it on Instagram all the time, right? Like. And I'm always like, man, how do these people do that? You know, like I feel like I should be doing something like that. You know, it's just good. It's good practice. It's like I think sometimes like, you know, these little things that you do, that they actually end up playing a bigger part maybe in your life. Like then, you know, you just started as like a fun daily practice maybe, you know, but then these characters develop. There's no pressure,
right?
Like you're just kind of, it's organic and you're just having fun, you know. So
I think there's a real value.
I'm talking myself into that now, actually.
I'm like, man, I should do pressure that. Because no pressure. Well, just because you're more likely to do something, because the more pressure you put on something, you're more thinking like, oh, it's got to be right the first time. I can't get anything wrong, and so you give yourself a lot of reasons why. Like, oh, well, tomorrow will be a better time because then I'll be, you know, this or that, you know. But if it's no pressure and you just do a thing, now you've done it. It's already, you know, you got that as you said, a rep in or something. So another thing that, you know, jump it to, I wanted to see how you would voice your ideas on it without me influencing it. But another, you know, an element there of why, like if you chose like let's just say a 10-page story, is because let's say you draw 10 pages, those could be the same amount of work as the first 10 pages of Skellingers, but the difference is that 10-page story is a beginning, middle, end, and so you've finished a project at 10 pages, and you're going to have reached first of all, you're going to have made decisions that take place within those stages of a story, right? The beginning, middle, and end, and then you're going to have a mental, basically a goal accomplished, right? The satisfaction, the relief of a completed project, which is not the same as the first 10 pages. Oh, whoops. Here I am. My desk around too much. The first 10 pages of Skellingers, you would know, well, there's still 38 more pages. So really, it's like, oh, I've barely done anything, you know? So it's a totally different place that you play, an experience that you've had.
For sure.
That's another reason why, if you're a beginning person, I would advise, you know, 48 pages is a really accomplishable goal for you because you have drawn, you know, but even then, it's an enormous milestone when you make it there.
Right.
But especially for
Yeah.
somebody who's like never drawn, like let's say a full issue of a comic, don't even 48 pages. Don't do that. Try to really hone. Do that smaller project.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. I mean, I think like that would have been good to start like a long time ago.
Yeah.
But it's good to do now too. I think. Yeah. It just. You break things into these like little chunks or whatever, and you can do long projects, but just having like that daily practice or weekly or whatever, where you're drawing a page, and you're just constantly doing that. They might be like more contained stories, but once that becomes like habitual, then it's much easier, I think, to move over to something longer.
Right.
Like the thing about like your own project that's, I mean, like again, 48 pages, not super long. Like for somebody that writes comics, that's like probably nothing. You do that in a week or something. But for me, it's like,
Right.
Okay, I'm still working on it or whatever. I have enough there, I think, for me to start and kind of start making some visual like drafts or whatever.
So what is the material that you've got for Skellingers right now? You as you set out on this create your own path, you had this idea for a story in your mind.
Mm-hmm.
And what was the first stage of like, now I'm going to, so I've got the idea. What comes after the idea for you? What have you how did you start to approach this?
So you mean just like the initial idea?
Right. So you had, like back in 2015 or 2016, whenever I first heard about Skellingers, it was there. It's been there in the back of your mind, or maybe on some some documents that you've typed up or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
But you've made a decision. I'm going to push it forward. So what are the steps forward? What did you do to get where you're at right now?
Yeah. Well, I mean, again, like you mentioned, like a few things that we talked about, like Ibex and like Betty's and Skellingers or whatever. Like I've kind of been like messing with all of them, and like just whenever I'll like just be sitting around or like on a flight somewhere is good. Like I just go to these stories, right, and I'm just trying to figure out what they are, and with Skellingers, it was just like I like the initial idea like wasn't much of an idea, I guess. It's just trying to remember like the very, very first thing that made me. I actually think I was like with my family maybe in Key West or something, and there are properties where families are like just buried on their property. So it's like you have the house, and then there's like off to the side is like a family cemetery, and I think that's like where the initial idea came from. But then it was like, okay, well, what's the story, and then it was sort of like, okay, here's like some little bits and pieces of things that like I would want to include, because I think like really early on, it would just be like, oh, this would be fun to draw. Right. And then it's like, well, how do I make that into a story? And I had no idea, so from the initial idea, then it was kind of like, well, I don't know how to write. I don't know how stories really work. I'm kind of learning, working in animation and stuff. And so then it was like about that. And then after some time where I felt like, okay, I'm starting to get an idea. Let me go back and look at these old stories and try to make them actually a complete story, And so eventually, like, I came back to Skellingers and we just think about it here and there, and man, how do I make it a complete story, and how do I end this thing? And
do you feel like you've gotten? Are you at that stage now? Do you feel like you've even if it's not 100%, you have a complete story? You know how you're going to end it. Do you feel comfortable at what you've generated at this point?
I have the beginning, the middle, and the end.
Okay. Yeah.
But I also know, like, we talked a couple of days ago, and I haven't had like a chance to read back over everything, but I've been thinking about it, and it's like you you ask yourself a lot of questions. You know, why is this happening? Does it make sense that this happens here? Couldn't this other thing have happened? Wouldn't that like make more sense? You know, so I've kind of been trying to like look back through it and make sure there's some like logic to these things that are happening. And so anyway, you know, like all the pieces are sort of there, but now I just have to make sure it all works and you know, I think fill in the gaps of like,
yeah, so okay, we might refer to this as a potential draft, right? So you had a version,
yeah,
and now you're going back through, looking at the whole thing to revise it. Now, at what stage do you feel like you're going to, you know, let's just call this the writing stage. Are you going to write yourself? Do you intend to write yourself a full script? What is your? I mean, this is this is what I'm saying. This was so exciting. So, like you know, on the creator-owned path, I'm further down the pathway. So I had to make these decisions a long time ago for myself. Like, what is it that I want in order to start my project? So for you, do you want to write a full script? What is it that you generate? Because like at this point, you haven't done even layouts, right?
Right.
So what do you want to make for yourself before you go into the layout stage?
Okay, so basically, like once I felt like, okay, I at least have like an ending here, that is like enough to kind of work. Then I started thinking like, okay, I want to, because it takes place in like the 50s, right? So I need to sort of understand the way things looked back then better, you know? So like I've been doing some drawings, you know, based on like some reference from that period of like the people and clothes and that kind of thing. So like, yeah, my perfect world idea is like, okay, I'm going to do that. And then I'm going to design my characters, you know, and I would love to have like, and this is all from animation pipeline stuff, right? Like have the backgrounds designed, you know,
all your key locations and stuff. Yeah. Interesting.
Yeah. So that's kind of like the idea. I don't know that's, I don't know if that's super realistic, honestly. Like, no, especially
because you're making me realize once again that I made these decisions a few years ago, but I did the exact same thing, right? Like, and it certainly came from an animation place where I mean, kind of, you know, even back in the comic book days, you know, working closely with Dustin Weaver, he would do those designs, you know, ahead of time too, whenever it was possible. But especially, you know, because we're doing creator-owned stuff and being influenced by the animation thing. I did that with Powerstars for sure. You know, I tried to get as much, you know, and I hired Kyle Shockley for the help as well with a ton of development of getting as much of the decisions, the creative decisions of how things looked. That way I could focus on the pure storytelling when it came into the drawing. So I think it's very realistic is what I'm saying. It's because I did a bunch of it. Now, actually, let me follow up here. When you say it's not very realistic, why do you say that? What is it? What would prevent you from doing it?
I'm just worried about the amount of time maybe that I would spend on that. Like like, you know, when you start laying out pages, then you know exactly what you need sort of based on your layouts, right? Like, right. And it's kind of like right there, like, okay, like to be able to like finish this page, I'm going to need to design this interior, you know? So before you can go forward with your pages, you kind of have to design that interior, you know, as opposed to like, okay, now I'm going to do characters. And then it's like, well, how many characters do I design? Do I design all of them before I start? You know, how many iterations of each character do I go through before? Like I have learned, you know, to give myself limitations, right? Like I did like some, you know, a few drawings and stuff of just like trying to, you know, figure out some of these characters or whatever. And I did limit myself. Like I'm going to do left-hand page in my sketchbook is basically like a reference exploratory sort of drawing. And then the right-hand page, that's like I pick the elements that I like, and then I draw the character, and that's the character,
Okay.
And it, not to say they can never change, but I'm limiting myself. Like, okay, left hand page, exploration, and kind of like, like I call it reference drawing, but just like trying to get a feel for how these things look or whatever. Yeah. And then, once that's filled, I have to decide,
So right.
So I am trying to like
decision page. This is the character that I'm going to work with as best I can. Yeah, that's awesome.
Yeah, and I know it'll change, somewhat, right? Like the more you draw a thing, you kind of like
you make figure out like every single refining into what the actual character becomes. Yeah, like I mean, I did this with Powerstars for such a long time of honing, and all that's exactly what it is. It's you drawing that character over and over and over and finding the little things like, oh no, actually right there, like this shape better than that shape. Yeah. And and part of what's, let me ask you this. So like, do you remember any projects where you saw that happen through the work? Meaning that, like, you don't know her, but she was a member of Periscope, and she did she was doing a long form webcomic called Family Man. And the way that her character looked on page 1 and page 100 was worlds apart in a lot of ways.
Oh yeah.
And and you could identify that the visual tags of were the same, so you knew it was the same character, but the evolution had gone so far. And she talked about like, well, I might need to go back and make changes on page 1 when I do the collected version. And so what I'm asking is, have you seen that yourself in any ways? What your thoughts are on the work containing the evolution of the character, and whether or not you would want to. So this is 3 parts to this question. Whether or not you would want to work out those, like I wanted to work out the evolution before I started drawing the comic. So when I got to drawing Powerstars, they look like how they're supposed to look from panel 1, page 1.
Yeah.
So I can repeat all 3 of them. Go ahead.
I think that like I'm the total opposite.
Interesting.
And maybe it's because like, I don't know, at some point I think I saw like some Peanuts drawings, like early Peanuts. Yeah. And I mean, I'm not like super into Peanuts or anything. But I remember like, okay, I think it stuck with me because I was sort of like surprised, right? Like
how different his early strips look as what we came to know.
Right. So like, man, one thing that animation has helped me with, and I'm still not like where I'd like to be with it, is just being consistent, drawing the same characters. I always felt like in the comic stuff, like every time I drew them, it's like, oh man, that looks different, which is not ideal. But so I think like when I saw that in some like comic strip characters, like, oh man, they changed a lot. Then I was like, okay, if I'm doing my own book, I'm not going to worry about it. Like I do want to have a design, like I want to design these characters beforehand. And like, do I want to do turnarounds? I don't know. I kind of feel like I don't, but maybe I should. But it's like, I want to have designs, but if they change, I expect them to change.
Okay.
And I'm cool with that.
Included in the actual.
Yeah. I mean, this is something I just thought about. If you look back at like your pictures of you as a kid, till now, it's like, of course you're growing and maturing, and these characters kind of stay. Like some of my characters will change, but most of them are going to be like the same age at the beginning and the end. But like, for like a longer book, it's like they're going to change. That
undoubtedly.
I think that's totally okay. You know. So I guess for a shorter book, I don't want them to change too much.
Sure. Yeah, I mean, especially the longer you work on something, you as the artist growing and stuff like. All right, so jumping back real quick, so now you're going to do designs, or you're going to work out as much visual stuff as you can. And to throw my own words in here, that can become its own reason not to progress once again. Right. You're like, well, I don't have everything figured out. I got to do all this, and so it's just an excuse that you give yourself not to actually begin work on the project. So it can become that, not that it will, but in terms of the story, do you want to, write yourself a script? What do you want? Just in terms of the words, let's say you get all the designs done, what do you have that you've written to begin doing layouts?
I mean, I basically just have it written out like in long form, like just basically just the whole story, and then I have other things in the same document. I have like a list of the characters, and then for some of them that I have figured out some of the backstory for, like that's something that I've been doing more recently, is like trying to write some figure out the characters a little better, because that to me is the most important thing, like for them to be interesting and to feel real, so I've been doing that, and that's all kind of like included in there. But I think like actually like you got me thinking with the design stuff. Like I think I need to have like a general amount of designs, like most of the characters sort of worked out. But then I can do it sort of in chunks. I think after that, like I can get to that point where I have my base characters, and then I can just start on the first chapter of layouts. And once I get done with that, then I'll have some layouts done, and then I can move on to the middle section there and figure out like, okay, I need to design these things now, and kind of move it along that way. So I am drawing the pages, because that's the I think that's the biggest roadblock, is like, man, you gotta start laying stuff out,
And then jumping back into your long form, do you have like all the dialogue written out and stuff, or is that going to be something that you? Well, go ahead. You tell me.
Yeah, I don't have any dialogue yet. I'm kind of thinking of it like I'm doing Marvel method with myself.
Yeah.
So I'll take that, and then I mean, as I'm drawing the layouts, I think I'll probably start working in some of the dialogue.
Yeah.
I won't do it after the fact, but that's my thinking on how I'm going to approach it. So yeah.
Yeah, and this is all
part of it.
Go ahead.
Well, I was just gonna say, like, part of it is just like, once I start laying it out, then I can have a better idea of like, okay, like I was thinking about adding a scene before the one that I'm currently going to start with, so I was kind of like debating that. Do I need that there? Is that something that I need to include at all? But yeah, I think like that'll become more clear as I start laying things out and figuring out, okay, that I need a scene here to bridge these two, where I don't know if it's like completely, I think it's okay right now, but as you get in there, things happen, man, and I know that like you have an idea of what the story is, but as you start to do it, then it's like, oh man, it doesn't really make sense, or I feel like it'd be cool if this happened, so I want to be able to change things if I need to,
Right. And then jumping back, I did a conversation with another artist the other day, Ted Galusha, and he commented about how he does a lot of freelance work, and not necessarily with comic books, but with like a variety of different creative clients. And that somewhere along the lines, I guess a lot of people have heard of the words Marvel method, and he always asks them, all right, so what does that mean to you? And they've all of them describe something that's not actually the Marvel method. So I'm putting on you right now. What is the Marvel method, Chris Staggs, as you understand it?
Okay. Well, I mean, I don't know that anybody knows, like exactly, because I mean, my understanding of it is basically like you would get a plot, that could be like very sparse, or it could, depending on the writer, it could be a little more worked out, right? But you're not getting a full script, so you're not getting things broken down into panels by page. which I would rather have the not have things broken down.
Mm-hmm.
You
Oh, I
know,
agree, 100%.
I would want the freedom to figure that out. I think like when you're first starting off, it's kind of nice, you know, like, oh, okay, this is how many panels I have. You know, you're not you don't. It takes like more off your plate, so you don't have
Sure.
to like worry about, oh man, how many pages do I do this in? Like, how much story can I tell in one panel? You know, like
Right.
it kind of is helpful in that way.
If the
But
writer
I think,
understands those rules.
yeah,
Or
well,
happens to understand them.
that
Yeah, go
yeah,
ahead.
yeah, no, for sure. I mean, you know, that's like it's part of that happens. You know,
Yeah.
but
And in
they're
regards to the
probably going to
Marvel
be
method, you got a plot, but between sparse and maybe a little bit more detailed. But then you, the artist,
yeah.
get to do what with that?
Well, I mean, then I'll just decide like, you know, how I want to tell this visually. You know, um, how like what pace I want scenes to move at. You know, that kind of a thing, as opposed to being like locked into, you know. Um,
Having
I mean,
everything
part
spelled
of
out, and the other is the other way.
having everything spelled
Yeah.
out, but part of like working on your own books is that you don't have to like, oh, this has to be 20 pages or this has to be 22 pages. You can get in there and you can start drawing it and laying pages out and stuff. And, you know, if I want, I can add 5 pages to it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
I can, so yeah, I'm not like worried about that kind of a thing, which, you know, again, it's like, it gives you the freedom to, um, play around with, your pacing and the storytelling in that way, you know. So, but again, like I haven't really done that a whole lot,
Right.
so I don't know. I don't know
Yeah,
how
I
I'm going
think
to
that a lot
approach
of
it.
this
You
is going to
know.
be interesting in terms of when you complete this project, what it will have helped you learn about how you want to work. And so for the second
Yeah.
project, how you will refine at that point in time. We can do a follow up interview at that time. So real quick, you're still in a very early stage, but I think nonetheless that some part of you potentially should think about this if you haven't already, which is where does this end up, right? So
Mhm.
like what do you want to do? Like, let's say you get it done. It's 48 pages, right? That's basically, as I understand it, 40 and up is what counts as a graphic novel in terms of a
Mhm.
single, that's the definition or whatever. So you got your 48-page graphic novel. What are you going to do with it? Where does it go from there? Do you want to try and get it published? Do you want to do self-publishing? What's even the vaguest sense of your direction right now?
Yeah. I mean, I I guess I would probably try to get it published.
Mm. Mm-hmm.
Um, Only because, yeah, I'm just not sure about like self-publishing. You know, how I would just like get it to people.
Mm-hmm.
You know, um, I just don't know how I'd go about doing that exactly. You know,
Yeah.
I mean, there's ideas that I have about it, but would they work? I don't know.
Yeah.
You know, like honestly, I mean, like you said, it is good to think about these things, but for me, it's like they're pretty far off.
Right. You've got to
You
get
know?
to the finish stage of actually having it
Yeah.
done. But I think having that
Yeah.
in working somewhere in the background, of like,
For
like
sure.
even with the idea, like right now, let's say that you do have a pretty strong sense that I want to try and get it published somewhere. Somewhere of like, well, where is that? What do I like? Who would want to publish this type of story? These are things
Yeah.
that you can have be bubbling on the back burner.
I mean, I guess to contradict myself immediately, like one thing that I like the idea of is, with these different like main projects that I would like to get done. Kind of like the part of what is exciting to me is the idea of like different formats and
Mm.
kind of like, um, you know, uh, yeah, just like different formats, like, doing some maybe that are larger, or like, one thing I like are like the old like treasury editions.
Yeah.
They're kind of just like giant comic books.
Yeah.
In a way, I like those. It's like they're not quite like the European albums, because they're not hardcover. They're floppy and stuff, but they're bigger. And
Absolutely.
that's cool. I'd like to actually Skellingers. I think would be cool for that, because it's a little bit like, it's like a horror story, and you have those magazines like the Creepies and the Eeries and those things that they were in magazine format, So I think to put it out like that would be kind of cool.
Yeah, it sounds cool.
So I don't know who would publish that. It might be something that I have to self-publish.
Yeah, just literally because of if that's the format decision you want, who even makes such a thing? Yeah, that's a good question.
Yeah, I mean, I would love to have it printed on newsprint.
Oh,
I don't even know if that's like possible.
Yeah, if there's machines out there any longer that can do such. Yeah.
Right, and it's probably, if there is, it's probably really nice newsprint.
Yeah, that's probably true. It's probably true.
I want the old stuff.
Yeah, it's probably more expensive just to try to do the sort of the old style or something. Yeah.
I'm like, can you dig out like an old ream of yellow newsprint? Like, that's what I want.
Yeah, that's an interesting question. Whether or not even some of that stuff exists. Jumping back a little bit in towards, in approaching with Skellingers, this is probably something we should have done way back when Skellingers was first mentioned in this, which is can you do a brief, can you do a blurb, especially if you choose to go down a traditional publishing route where you're going to have to pitch to a company to say, here's what my idea is about, right? Yeah. So can you do a blurb? Can you do like a single or 2 sentences of what Skellingers is?
Probably not, actually.
All right, I'll try your whatever.
You put me on the spot. Yeah, I mean, I guess this is like part of like what I should have this down.
Well, let me give you an idea of what what I mean by this, because Powerstars, for example, the smallest version of it, the blurb is super-powered cavemen battling alien dinosaurs for the most powerful energy source in the universe, right? I haven't mentioned characters. I haven't mentioned, I give you an idea, superpowered caveman, alien dinosaurs, but I don't get into all of the deep parts of it, right? So that's what I was going for here, is that can you give me something that high up, that far out? The elevator pitch.
Next time.
Okay. All right. Well, give me something right now as you understand with your story, so that people know what we're talking about Skellingers in general.
Yeah, I mean, well, the basic idea is like, you have this family, the Skellingers, and they were like, there's generations of them that have lived in this area, and they've all been like particularly wicked people, and eventually the city sort of turns on them, and they're put under a curse to, like, every year they sort of like come back. They're like bound to the house, and the house sort of acts as a bug zapper, and it kind of it draws like the worst elements to it, and then they sort of their curse is basically to cleanse the city of like the most evil people, and it happens every year, and then they sort of go away. So the story is about them trying to find a way to escape the curse.
The Skellingers escape the curse.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. Well, it's I guess the only way we really know is if somebody listening who's never heard any of the story concept is understands what you've just described and is intrigued.
And when they escape, they have to battle alien dinosaurs from.
I mean, what you like?
The most powerful.
Obviously, I know a little bit about Skellingers, the expanded part of the story, but nonetheless, what you described is still intriguing to me. But yeah, we haven't even gotten into the actual main characters and all the plot and stuff. So yeah, that's just something to have in your. Once again, one of those things bubbling in the background that, like, because you can tackle it every now and then, of what is it that I mean, because this is one of the challenging things for a storyteller is that you know everything. You have all the details in your head, and to
Yeah.
hone that down into something that is just like punchy and immediate. That's the thing. Like, I didn't know that was going to be my blurb until I tossed it out one day to somebody, and they perked up, and I was like, oh, okay, interesting. And then I realized I kept doing it, and people kept perking up. They'd be like, oh, that's it's the first thing where they're like, oh, that could be cool, right? Now, whether or not once they get past into the deeper stage of it, like, oh no, this does suck after all, but
Yeah.
it's you'll find these moments, these little lines that hopefully catch that somebody's attention for a second. All right.
Sure.
So in general, like you're at a stage where you're at the stage where you're doing your designs, as I understand it. Because I can see on Instagram that you started to do characters and stuff, and if not just now, you already have a plan here where you're going to do the set of designs. The first portion of your story, you're going to do layouts. And so, when do you expect to have? Do you have an idea of what you're trying to aim for in terms of? You said this year was for the drawings. You intend to have some progress made this year. That's a conscious decision you've made.
Oh yeah, yeah. I've ever written. Actually, it's in my sketchbook here. I sort of wrote down. I mean, it's ambitious. Like
Sure.
it's not just the story. Like I do actually want to work on like a shorter thing at the same time. But yeah. I mean, so I'm kind of like figuring out the characters and who they are and that kind of thing, and that's going to influence the story quite a bit, I think. So I'm doing that, like in terms of like the things that I'm thinking about as far as like the drawing and stuff goes. What I need to do is I need to come up with a schedule for like what I'm going to accomplish every week, and just try that out for a few weeks and see if it's realistic. Can I do more? Do I need to expect a little bit less to get done? So I'll do that for sure next. Try to, because that's something I was like thinking about yesterday, and I'll just have to see like what is realistic.
Yeah.
So that's the very next thing as far as like the drawing stuff goes, and then yeah, just figuring out a little bit more of like who the characters are. And I've been doing that. Like I've been reading about some real things that happened and real people, that's kind of been helpful. Like, oh, I have this character that's this way. And then I read about like this real guy and there's like little details about that person. I'm like, oh, that would work great for this character.
You're saying that it adds more to what you'd have come up with, or it's actually changing what you came up with?
I guess it depends on the character, but like, one in particular that I'm thinking of, I had an idea of like what they were going to be like. And then as like I said, I was reading about some of these real things and real people. There's some details. I'm like, oh, this would make a better, like a more real, believable person, as opposed to just like, you when you come up with an idea, it's like often very generic,
Yeah.
And so I think the more you can sort of like pull from real life, it just makes things.
Yeah, it's interesting. This
more...
is exactly like drawing, right? Like you draw a pose out in your head, but then you maybe like look at some reference, and you're like, oh, that's how the arm actually works, or that's how the folds. How interesting! I wouldn't have known that. So it's the exact same thing when the writing or the creating of the characters. Every time you look at life, there's so much more surprising and cool stuff than what you can, dream up. Out of your limited experience.
It's like a little embarrassing in a way, but it's like I've always, most of my adult life I've drawn, and it's a lot of drawing the same things, but I haven't like created a ton of characters, so it's like, man, like we were creating characters, like how do you make something that is actually like has some complexity to it, you know,
Mm-hmm.
and is something that real people can relate to. You know, I was thinking about that just with like story stuff. It's like, you know, even if you're doing like a science fiction story, you know, I was just thinking about how, man, if you have a character that like still has relatable problems, like they've got like issues with money or something, it could be like some futuristic version of currency,
Right.
right? But it's like everybody can relate to that. Everybody's like wanted to do something and they couldn't because they couldn't afford it or whatever. And it's like, even though this is like maybe a really fantastical sort of setting or world that these characters live in, if they have these sort of real problems that everybody's experienced, you know, it's just going to make it that
A
much
way that
more
they can identify or
relatable.
relate with. Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
This is
The same
exactly.
thing with characters, you
Mm-hmm.
know.
Yeah. Yeah. This is a once again, this is this is a fascinating aspect of being able to catch you at this moment where you said you haven't created a lot of characters, and so you're tackling
Yeah,
some of these early stage questions of what all creators have to go through. So this is why I'm doing these interviews. Hopefully, is to capture these moments of the different stages of where all of the people who are
for
trying to go
sure.
down this creator own route are. All right, so in terms of I said earlier that I saw the Skellingers, some of the character designs on Instagram and stuff. Where if people want to check in with more of your journey or to see the Skellinger stuff as it progresses, besides Instagram, is there anything else? And what is your Instagram?
I right now it's just my Instagram. I mean, I guess I have a YouTube channel, but like I haven't really uploaded anything.
Mm,
Uh, I think I have one video up there. I've been trying to record more. You know, like I got like a little thing to record process and that, as I work. You know,
yeah,
so I do intend on
showing
uploading
process
more
drawings and
to
stuff.
YouTube,
Yeah,
like some of the
that's
longer
awesome.
stuff. And I've been doing that a little bit on Instagram. So yeah, it's really just Instagram now. But like a real website would be nice, I think.
Yeah.
Although it's just, I don't know, I don't know what people do anymore. But I feel
Uh,
like it would be good to have something
right.
specific
Well, what it
eventually.
is, it counts as basically well, who knows what people do? I don't know
Yeah,
either.
yeah,
But what I like about websites are it's a home base where this
yeah.
is my home base in any direction. Like you'll have your potential your YouTube channel and your Instagram and Twitter or whatever it may be
Hmm.
that they can branch off into their thing. But this is ground zero. So I
Right.
think that's cool. I think websites are cool. So what is the
I think
name? What
I've
is your
been
name
seeing
on?
more.
You've seen more people doing websites now that's coming back,
I feel like I have been.
or
I don't.
maybe
Maybe that's just my imagination, but
yeah.
I feel like I've been going to more websites again recently, like of artists, but I'm linked to them from their Instagram. It's like
Oh, right, right, right,
they'll
right.
have a link from that
Well, what
to
is the
their
name of your
website.
Instagram?
So,
What's your online handle? I'll obviously put it into the links, but what is it?
yeah, it's at Staggs Art,
Stags.
Staggs Art. Yeah.
Okay. And what's
So
your YouTube?
I think it maybe is the same.
Okay.
I can't remember offhand. Like I said, I haven't. I have like one video uploaded, and that was years ago. So
All right. So this is still ambitious at this point, right? You're still in the early stages of even getting through. I just did a quick search. Stags Art YouTube. I am not seeing something, so you're gonna have to look that up. But what when is ibex? So you do Skellingers, then what is the
yeah.
if you looked out to the future and let's say you just went hardcore creator on at this point, what is your trajectory of projects?
Okay. Scavengers is first, and then after that, I want to do like some of these short stories.
Mm-hmm.
I have ideas for probably 4 to 5 shorter kind of stories.
Okay.
So I guess like right now, yeah, who knows? But if I can finish Skellingers, then I will work on those. I think the shorter ones. Um, yeah, so that's sort of like one of the things I'd like to do is just put together like a book of like just different short stories, you know.
Yeah, an anthology,
So
basically.
yeah,
Yeah.
and they're all very different, you know. Some of them are just like normal life kind of things, and then yeah, some of them are a little more like science fiction, that kind of thing. So it wouldn't be like a cohesive, you know,
Yeah,
just
right.
the common denominator would just be like
That they're all your
it's all my
stories.
stuff.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah,
But the goal
yeah.
is
So
so
yeah,
for people, the way I interpret it anyway, IBEX is your biggest project. It is your masterwork
yeah.
as it is right now. So I'm curious in your mind, where does so we got uh, Skellingers, the anthology short stories. Where does IBEX even right now? How do you feel like what even vaguely of the fog of the future? Where does
Yeah.
IBEX fall into the product line?
I mean, I guess possibly after the short stories.
Okay.
Um, I mean, I laid out that one, like a short Ibex story, that I wrote, that is like ready to draw. I laid it out twice.
Mm.
Um, I laid it out in my sketchbook, and it's maybe a little too small. I don't know. And I did it different ways both times. So yeah, that's kind of like there. You know, I could draw that now.
Would that count as a short story that you would put into the anthology? Because like it's like a 10-page story, right, or something?
Yeah, it's like 9 pages, I think. Maybe it's 11 pages, but
Because it
yeah,
was
it's
written to
around
be
that.
a little one-off. Would that be something? Like I said, would you include that in the anthology, or would that be something that you would hold back for IBEX releases?
Um,
Because it's not technically a it's not like the start of IBEX. It was a small project you did as an experiment that just happens to be in the
yeah.
IBEX world.
Well, I mean, you know, like with the Ibex stuff, there's like sort of the main story, and then I wanted to do these kind of like little interludes, you know, that were just like simple. And I was even thinking like trying to like push the style more, and like, because initially I was like, I'll do it as like a strip,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
like a cartoony like comic strip. Which I mean, I would love to do that actually. I just don't know, like, you know, trying to do like a different style, how much that would slow me up. But that was the initial idea. So yeah, I have that. You know, that's something that I could do now. You know, um, but yeah, I think like possibly that with the short stories that would be good,
Mm,
because then I would at least get started on it.
yeah.
And then after that, working on the main one. That Betty story is one that I would still want to do. And that again is like would be a little bit shorter than like Ibex would be kind of like a pretty big project.
Yeah,
So
especially I'm asking, thinking about it now, because I have my own what I think of as the major work to do, and it's called Ghoulomancer. And in my mind, and this is partly why I'm asking for you how to see how you're doing it in your mind, is I'm pretty sure that I want to get all the other projects done before Ghoulomancer. So in my head,
mm,
it's like, yeah, let me knock out all these other things, which are all smaller, and then it's just that thing for whoever how long it goes, and then because
yeah,
there may not be anything. Rather, all the projects that I have are there isn't after anything after that. So then it would be all
mm,
whatever brand new stuff came in after that. So that why I was asking, in terms of like Betty's and Ibex, I was seeing where it fell, and I'm pushing Ibex so hard that it might have sparked you to put it earlier, but it'll be interesting to see if you choose to do Betty's just to get that, because it's a smaller project. Once again, get that under your belt, and then have the full focus of Ibex just for the future.
yeah. You know, I mean, I have kind of like a few thoughts about it. You know, I had thought like, okay, Ibex will be after I do these other things.
Mm-hmm.
You know, partly because it's the biggest story, and then also because it's like I know that the more I do, the better I'll be.
Mm-hmm. Yep.
So
Yeah.
when I finally do work on that's going to be as good as I could possibly be at that time. You know, but then there is another part of me. It's like, man, because this is kind of like where my mindset is now. It's like, dude, like get things done. You know, like just do stuff. You know, so like in my sort of like goals for the year, you know, primarily like comic wise, Schellingers is like, you know, get some artwork done for that. But then it's also like, you know, because man, you know how it is. You're working on one thing all the time. It's like, you know, sometimes you want to break from that.
Right.
But you know, you don't want to like just maybe do nothing, right? So it's like I think having maybe a couple different things that I'm working on would work better, you know. Like this last like character I did, I ended up like sort of painting it a little bit, which that was kind of fun, you know. But it's not. I don't want to do that very often, you know, because it's sort of like it's not exactly like
It's
what
not
I'm trying to
what you
do. But
need
it's
to do
nice.
at the moment.
Yeah, but it's like it's a nice like other thing to work on that's still creative, you know. But anyway, yeah. So I think like I think maybe I would start working on some layouts, you know, or designs or something, you know, related to Ibex, but maybe not the full, you know, pages and that kind of thing. But you know, maybe start working on some of the designs,
Right,
and
just to chip away every, you know, little, just a
yeah.
break from, you know, if you're like right now,
So like maybe like drawing one story and doing the things that story requires of you, but then also like, okay, on this, like I'll continue to write things, or, you know, yeah, just to make some progress still. So yeah, maybe not like drawing.
right, but you're getting I mean,
But
that's in a lot of ways the most crucial step there, and it won't be at
yeah,
zero when you, yeah. All right, well,
yeah, laying that foundation.
let's see if exactly laying the foundation. Let's see if
Yeah,
hopefully this, you know, whoever happens to listen to this might have some guidance or some interest in some guidance in their own create their own trajectory, and then some
for sure.
interest in what you're creating. All right, well, thanks a ton
Yeah.
for doing this.
Oh yeah,
At
it's
some
awesome,
point,
man.
you know, when you get further down the road, it'll be nice to check in and follow up at that time.
Yeah, yeah, for sure. We'll definitely have to meet up again in a little bit, and you know, show you like what I've done in the meantime, maybe, or
Let's do it.